Hello, welcome to the India Story, the only show tailor-made from India for a global audience. I'm Vikram Chandra. Every week I bring you top stories from India that matter not only to India but to the world at large. And next week, we're going to be on the cusp of a watershed moment for the India Story. India all set to host the G20 summit for the first time. A remarkable diplomatic opportunity that has got everybody really excited. And that G20 summit is our special focus on the India Story this week. And we have a big exclusive for you. Coming up on the show, an exclusive interview with India's G20 Sherpa, the man who is heading it all, the man who is going to be sitting with other Sherpas next week in Manesar trying to figure out the communique, and the person who's then hopefully going to be driving to some sort of a consensus at G20. Amitabh Kant, India's Sherpa to G20, will be joining us on the program in just a couple of minutes to discuss G20. Also on the show, after the success of its moon mission Chandrayaan-3, it's time for ISRO to turn its attention to the sun. India is going to be launching its first solar mission, Aditya L1, on September the 2nd. We're going to be speaking to space scientist Professor Narendra Bhandari on the importance and the uniqueness of this mission. And did I say we have one big exclusive for you on the show today? I wasn't entirely accurate. We have two. Because you know who's the other man of the moment this week? Neeraj Chopra. Yes, we've been tracking his exploits. People have been calling him the greatest of all time, the GOAT when it comes to Indian athletics. Just won a gold at the World Championship, silver right now at the Diamond League. And he joins us on the India Story for an exclusive interview. All of that coming up for you in just a couple of minutes, but first, some of the big headlines you should be tracking.
In an unexpected development, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha will be in session for 5 days next month. The government has called for a special session of Parliament from September 18th to September 22nd to hold fruitful discussions and debate amid Amrit Kal, according to a post on X by Union Minister Prahlad Joshi on August 31st. There is no official word on the agenda of this rare 5-day session, which will be held days after the G20 summit in the national capital. But according to reports, quoting sources, the government may introduce some highly debated bills such as One Nation, One Election, Uniform Civil Code, and Women's Reservation. In a statement, Adani Group has rejected what it termed recycled allegations after reports in The Guardian and the Financial Times established an alleged trial between individuals and entities that bought shares of Adani companies and relatives of Gautam Adani. Citing a report by the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, an investigative platform, the reports have reignited the Adani row, as Rahul Gandhi once again targeted the Prime Minister, asking him to initiate a thorough probe into fresh allegations of irregularities in the Adani Group. A recent study has found Delhi to be the most polluted city in the world. Besides this, the study also says that approximately 18 million residents of the National Capital Region are on the verge of losing an estimated 11.9 years of their lifespans due to this rising level of pollution. The study by the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago also revealed that the particulate pollution, specifically from fine airborne particles known as PM 2.5, is responsible for reducing the average lifespan of an Indian by 5.3 years. Amid a chill in ties with Pakistan, the Indian government has chosen a woman to head the High Commission in Islamabad for the first time since independence. Geetika Srivastav will replace M. Suresh Kumar as the Charge d'Affaires in Islamabad. She is a 2005 batch Indian Foreign Service officer. Due to a downgrading of diplomatic relations, both India and Pakistan are being represented by CDAS in Delhi and Islamabad instead of High Commissioners. Just days before India hosts world leaders for the G20 summit, an American think tank published a survey on what Indians and non-Indians think about India's influence on the world stage. 68% of Indian adults believe that India's influence has grown internationally, according to a study by PEW Research Center. However, only 28% of adults in 19 other countries think that India's influence has grown. 46% of adults in 23 countries have favorable views of India, while 34% have an unfavorable opinion.
Next week is going to be one of the biggest weeks in India's diplomatic calendar ever. After more than 200 meetings of ministers and bureaucrats and business leaders and experts, we're just a few days away now from the big one. The G20 summit itself. Leaders of some of the largest economies in the world in one room. And this year, that room is in New Delhi. To tell you everything that's happening behind the scenes and beyond the headlines, we have the ultimate insider, India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant, joining us for a very special exclusive interview. But before we go to him, let me just give you some context. What is the G20? Is it important? If yes, then why? And what exactly is India trying to achieve through the G20 this year as the president of the G20? Now, the G20 is a grouping of 20 of the world's largest economies. It was formed in 1999 to act on global financial stability. While the G20 began as a forum for finance ministers and central bankers, the heads of state and government began holding annual summits from 2008 onwards. It has a system of annual rotational presidency among the member states. In the past, the G20 has discussed important issues like the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID pandemic, Iran's nuclear program, and also the Syrian civil war. But there are already a lot of such groups with different combinations of countries, not to mention the United Nations itself. So is there anything special about the G20? Or is it just one more platform for leaders to meet, to say platitudes, and to leave? Well, we should set all that cynicism aside because the G20 is actually considered one of the more representative and one of the more effective global groupings. Its members include both rich and developing nations. G20 members represent around 60% of the world's population and account for more than 80% of the global economic output, 75% of global exports. Bilateral meetings held on the sidelines of G20 summits are also significant. Donald Trump, as the US president, met Putin for the first time at the G20 meeting in Germany. Similarly, Joe Biden, as president, met Xi Jinping for the first time at last year's G20 summit in Indonesia. Now, the flip side of that is that if you look away from the high-profile photo ops, if you look at G20's actual report card in the past, the performance has been patchy. The high point, perhaps, for the group was the 2008 financial crisis when the member countries took some concrete and active steps to stabilize the global economy. But the same level of coordination has been missing on other issues, even those as important as the COVID pandemic. G20 members did give relief on debt repayment, for example, to poor countries after that. But experts say that the COVID response strategies were largely local and uncoordinated. One example, for example, vaccine distribution. Some poorer countries felt that the richer nations used their money power to hoard vaccines at the expense of some of the poorer countries and at the worst points of the pandemic. Similar story regarding climate change. So G20 has been effective sometimes, not effective sometimes. If the G20 really has the power to make a change, the challenge is tapping that power. So as the G20 president this year, how successful has India been in making the group more productive? First, let's see the agenda which Delhi has actually pursued at the G20. And it's been doing it for a while, ever since it took over as the president. The highlight, of course, will be at the summit, though, next week. Main issue for New Delhi has been to try and raise and address issues affecting the global south, which includes lesser developed nations. Some big concerns for the global south currently are high inflation, food insecurity, fueled, of course, by events like the Ukraine war. Another item on the table has been discussions on measures to tackle climate change and weather disasters, which once again hit poorer countries the hardest. Also, India has been pushing to make the African Union a G20 member. There are also talks on rising debt levels and what can be done about them, and once again, especially among developing nations. The COVID pandemic, of course, had derailed the Sustainable Development Goal agenda. India has been trying to put that back on the agenda. So India's agenda is ambitious, but the challenges are significant too. The biggest cloud over G20 events this year has, of course, been the Ukraine war, which is causing a lack of consensus on the contents of the joint statement. If this is not sorted out by the end of the summit, and if no formal declaration is issued, then it would be the first time in G20's history that that happens. Another big challenge is ensuring cooperation among members while there is tension between them, with the US and China, for example, engaged in an economic and geopolitical contest. On India's advocacy of the African Union joining G20, there could be possible opposition from some countries in ASEAN, Switzerland, other countries and groups which want to become G20 members, and they are going to be wondering what happens if the African Union gets inside. Challenge number 4, how to address the distress caused by both COVID and the Ukraine war, which has led to 100 countries seeking IMF help so far. A related issue is the G20's common framework for debt treatment failing to take off. Only 4 countries have actually sought debt relief under this so far. So many challenges and lots of issues for India to try and navigate successfully. But that also means that if somehow India is able to do this successfully in the next week, 10 days, there will be lots of plaudits to be earned. It has to be said that the entire geopolitical situation around us is obviously causing a major headache for India in being able to pull this off successfully. Summits of world leaders are high on optics, and for such meetings to be seen as a success, what is sometimes important is the physical presence of all leaders. But it's clear that Russian President Vladimir Putin is not coming. He's already told Prime Minister Modi that he will not be coming to Delhi. And the Chinese President Xi Jinping, well, you never completely know with China, but all indications very clearly are that Xi is not going to be coming either, and he is going to be skipping the big event. So that means the optics around this entire event are in any case going to be somewhat problematic. Or are they? There are others who will argue that if Xi had come and if Putin had actually come, then maybe they would have ended up dominating the entire G20 agenda, and actually their absence in a physical sense may mean that the attention can shift to some of the subjects that India wants the attention to be shifted on. And I've already told you what are some of the topics that India wants to focus on, mainly the economic ones, not the geopolitical ones. That at least seems to be some of the big picture, some of the broad agenda that all the analysts have been thinking about and talking about and speculating about as we run up to the crucial week. But hey, why are we wondering about it? Let's just ask the man himself, India's Sherpa to the G20, the person who's in charge of putting all of this together. So just a short while back, I got the chance to sit down with him for an exclusive interview, and I put all of these questions to him. What is India's agenda? What does India hope to achieve? And what will it take to make this G20 summit a grand success? Here's my interview with Amitabh Kant. Well, with just a few days to go for that big G20 summit in New Delhi, who better to talk to than to figure out exactly what's happening, what last-minute preparations are taking place, what the agenda is likely to be, and what the aims and objectives are. Then India's Sherpa to G20, Mr. Amitabh Kant. It's going to be a really hectic few days for you, so thank you so much for, first of all, taking the time to speak to us and tell us what lies ahead. There's going to be a Sherpa meeting first, right, from the 3rd, and then I guess that's when the final declarations will all be prepared before the summit. What's on the agenda for the next few days?
So, Vikram, for the last 15 days, we've been having virtual sessions with all the 20 plus 9 invitee countries and all the international organizations. We've discussed the draft. Now, it has to be discussed in person. We've had many challenging issues. Our draft is very ambitious. As the Prime Minister had wanted us to be ambitious, he wanted us to be very inclusive, which is what we have been. We've been very decisive and very forward-looking, and also very action-oriented. There are challenges. We are very hopeful of sorting them out. because when you are negotiating with 20 countries, G20 countries, the challenges of bringing in a consensus, and everybody has a veto power. Everybody has a veto power. And in multilateral discussions, the challenge is that you do not want, you try not to have a footnote. You try and bring everybody to the same level. That is what we've been attempting to do. We've been greatly successful, but hopefully we should see it through.
Well, presumably the biggest areas of remaining negotiation, where the biggest sticking points are going to be questions around Ukraine and geopolitics, and Russia and China seem to be dissociating a bit from what happened in Bali. So is that the biggest problem for you right now?
Well, that's a challenge, but let me first say that the Ukraine war is not our creation. It's for us, being the voice of the global South, to bring all the developmental issues up front, to be, as the Prime Minister said, very human-centric in our approach, and to focus on all our key priorities has been the primary aim. And all through the year in our ministerials, we have pushed all these issues up front. We have brought them center stage. And we've pushed the India narrative, we pushed the ambition, we've pushed all our key priorities. Those are important for us. Driving strong, sustainable, inclusive growth is the key task of G20. Driving sustainable development goals is the key task of G20. Driving, climate action and climate finance, and then ensuring that the multilateral financial institutions are able to provide adequate resources for both SDG and MDBs. The climate action should be, the resources must be able to come in from MDBs through new instruments of blended finance, credit guarantees, etc. And then digital transformation and the digital public infrastructure, which India has done enormously well at. And throughout the whole year, we evangelize that. And lastly, the Prime Minister's priority of women-led development, women's empowerment, gender equality, all that is key. So we've tried to bring all these issues center stage.
You spoke to her shortly after taking over as Sherpa, and you did say that development is going to be India's agenda and issues around the global South, and not so much geopolitics. But obviously, when it comes to the rest of the world watching this, then that geopolitics is one of the things that they will be looking at. There are going to be questions, for example, around the fact that Vladimir Putin is not going to be here, and that's perhaps understandable for other reasons, but neither will Xi Jinping, if the reports are to be believed.
So, well, we'll have the Chinese premier here, we'll have the Russian foreign minister here, and even in Bali, Mr. Lavrov represented Mr. Putin there. And but irrespective of that, let me tell you that there'll be a whole range of leaders here, and there will be all the heads of international organizations, and our discussions will be very lively, and we'll focus very strongly on these things. But the important thing from our perspective is that we should be able to get through all the developmental issues and then bring the Ukraine issue. In Bali, the Ukraine issue occupied center stage. We've been able to keep it at the back end and push all the ambitious issues through, and that has been demonstrated in the ministerials. The para 3 and 4 of the Bali, which really showed that the commitment towards UN Security Council resolutions, etc. And out of the para 3 and 4, we've been able to convince Russia to agree to para 4. So the only para of disagreement right now remains para 3. And we are very hopeful that when Sherpas meet, they are able to bring agreement on.
Well, India played a major role in helping to get that consensus at Bali. So presumably Brazil, which is about to take over, and other countries will also try and get some consensus draft which everyone can sign off on.
We are very hopeful that during our presidency, because the next presidency will be held by Brazil and subsequently by South Africa, all of them will collaborate with us to help bring consensus on the table. We are very hopeful. But I can assure you that consensus on most ambitious issues of development and many other issues.
On all of those issues, it's already done.
We will move forward very vigorously.
The fact that Xi Jinping was not going to be here may actually, paradoxically help in one thing, that Bali also got overtaken a little bit by the Biden-Xi Jinping meeting and that bilateral, and that ended up taking all the headlines almost away from G20. So that, I guess, is not going to happen in Delhi.
G20 is a very important summit. It discusses all the issues which is currently plaguing the world. And this is an occasion for leaders to discuss issues in the summit. It's important to focus on the summit rather than many bilaterals. And we should not allow bilaterals to overtake the summit. The summit is focused on Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The summit is focused on one earth, one family, one future, and how to bring human-centric development. If that gets overshadowed, it'll be tragic.
So let's come to the summit. This app is, Delhi is all dressed up, is looking pretty, it's green. It's great that it's happening in September, so the air is also really clean. Must be really exciting, because I don't think Delhi or India, for that matter, have ever hosted something quite at this scale before.
Yeah, so everyone's worked together, and I'd really like to appreciate the work done by the Delhi Lieutenant Governor in marshalling all resources to really green Delhi and to bring in a lot of flowers and to really give it a nice, beautiful look with a lot of water fountains, etc. And Delhi looks nice. All of us should feel proud of our capital. And secondly, I think everyone from protocol to logistics to security, everyone has done a tremendous job, and hopefully we should be able to do a really top-class professional event here. Our objective is to be very systematic, to be very professional, to be very methodical in all this, and not allow to remain focused on the summit.
So, people watching this all around the world, they'll say, what should we be really looking for in Delhi? What should we be anticipating to see? Of course, there's a new convention center that they're going to get to see. Maybe if you could just share a little glimpse of what's going to happen in those 2 or 3 days when all the world leaders are here.
So when the world leaders are here, they will actually be spending most of their time at the summit. That's 1.5 days. They will also go to the Raj Ghat, pay homage to our father of nation, and also send the message of peace there. And the spouses have a separate treatment. They go to the Agricultural Research Institute and they spend a day at the National Gallery of Modern Art, going through culture, going through many other experiences. As far as the leaders are concerned, their focus remains the summit. We want to remain very, very focused on the summit.
And what would you like the headlines to be coming out of the summit? I know you can't craft the headlines and they're almost things. What would you like the summit and India's presidency to be remembered by?
Well, I think first of all, the presidency should really, the headline should be about growth and development of the world, because that's what India is focused on. It's about the last mile. It's about citizens. Our presidency has been very citizen-centric, and therefore, the impact that it will have on the community of the world in terms of SDGs, in terms of, we should not lose track of the basic growth issues, because 1/3 of the world is in recession. 75 countries are in global debt. They're going through a very terrible period. You have 200 million people who've gone below poverty line. 100 million people have lost their jobs. So our presidency should be remembered for its unique contribution to both the citizens of the world, to growth of the world, which is sustainable and inclusive, and for being the voice of the global south. Because that's important, because 80% of the growth this year is going to come from global south. 2/3 of the growth in the coming 2 decades will come from emerging markets. And therefore, you need resources to flow into these markets. These countries have a young population, low dependency burden, unlike the aging population in many G7 countries.
So when you look at, I'm going to just go into some of the aspects that you were talking about in slightly greater detail. Let's start with growth. And obviously the headlines coming out of India right now when it comes to growth, okay, you could quibble about some of the statistics and statistical effects of the pandemic, but the fact that we've just announced 7.8% for Q1, it's a big number to be actually going into G20 with, saying, look, this is the growth that's happening here. What are you going to be telling the rest of the world when it comes to growth? Any of the lessons that they can
So,
learn from
I
India?
think the most important thing is the political and the developmental narrative, that you have a leader who's, won the election twice in a democracy and whose public rating is still 80%. So, that's a very high, your political leader has a lot of credibility, huge credibility, being a democracy and winning elections in democracy. Second is the development narrative, that you've built 40 million houses, you've done about 80,000 kilometers of road, you've done 110 million toilets, you've done 23 million of water pipelines. All these are remarkable success stories, and the fact that we were able to do 2.2 billion COVID vaccination and that we do 46% of the real-time digital payments in the world. I mean, we are doing 11x more payment than USA and Europe. We do 4x more than China. All these is remarkable development stories. So, India hosts the G20 with a huge developmental and a great political narrative at that.
There's also a good story for India to tell when it comes to climate change, right? Because that is one area where, if you look at the Paris goals and what was outlined, if you look at the share of India's energy that is now being contributed by renewables, it's really high. It's one of the highest now in the world and growing very fast. Do you think India will also be using, and you will be using, G20 to talk about some of that and to talk about some things like one world, one solar grid and the solar
Of
that
course.
we're talking about?
No, it's a huge story. India is the only country which achieved its NDC targets 9 years ahead of schedule. India is the only country, only G20 country to figure in the list of the top 10 countries in the Clean Climate Index. So, we've done whatever we could do. We've gone way ahead of other countries. We need not be apologists at all. We have done much better than any G20 country, or for that matter, any country.
Where the story becomes a little bit more problematic perhaps is, or there are questions around it, is what you were saying about the global south. Now, India has always wanted to, and right from independence, we've been champions of the idea of the global south and getting the global south together. But as we've seen recently, you see it in BRICS, you see it in other things, there are tensions between the global south. I mean, there are tensions between India and China, which we all know about, and other such countries. So, is it a bit of a mythical creature trying to put the global south together, given the contradictions that lie even within the global south?
So, when we started our presidency, the Prime Minister held a meeting of the global south. 125 leaders participated. We got the inputs. Based on that, we based our priorities. And India is the first country which has really, Prime Minister wrote to all the leaders that we should make African Union a permanent member of G20, and that will be a major achievement. The issue has had a very wide support from all the leaders, and that will be a huge, huge achievement.
I was about to actually come to that, because that may well end up being one of the biggest headlines in the Indian presidency if there is actual movement on that, giving the African continent a seat at G20 in a substantive manner. I mean, of course, there are countries.
No, that will be a major achievement, but there will be many, many more. India will have many more achievements than what any other presidency has achieved. I can assure you that. Our achievements will be very far-reaching.
All right, we're waiting to hear some of that. Now, on the other issues which are of India's interest, that is the reform of the United Nations Security Council and other things, and there's been talk about that. There are even hints at the BRICS summit. But again, with countries like China presumably having a veto power on that, is there likely to be movement on that or no?
Well, some of these issues have been discussed. Some of these issues will be discussed at the leaders' level. So, it will be premature for me to comment on some of these issues at this stage.
All right. Looking now again at, I'm again trying to arrive at the sort of consensus views that you are particularly driving for. When you're sitting with the Sherpa next week, 3rd to the 7th, do you have your ideas of 1, 2, 3, 4 top things that I'm hoping
So, one
to get
is
them all to sign
to
up for?
get a consensus on multilateral reforms. That
Which is not just the Security Council,
it's the
but
financing,
other things?
financing.
Global financing.
Yeah, global finance. To get a consensus on climate action, to get a huge consensus on the new SDG action plan coming out of G20, to get a consensus on women-led development, that is women empowerment and gender equality, to get a consensus around our own model of digital public infrastructure. That will be huge. So there's a vacuum on digital public infrastructure today. There's no financial architecture around it to be able to do that.
And will you be suggesting that, for example, the Indian models on UPI could be taken to
Of
other
course,
countries?
of course. That will be a very major step forward to accept the definition of DPI, because the world is only used to big tech, both here and in China, in the western part of the world and China. To accept the definition of digital public infrastructure, to accept the framework of digital public infrastructure, and then to drive it all over the world.
All the items that you said, other than reforming the multilateral organizations, hopefully we should be able to get some sort of a consensus, as you're saying.
We are quite hopeful. We are quite positive. We are quite optimistic.
So the problems will eventually only come down to geopolitics, like Ukraine and Russia and China and what they're going to say.
We will discuss after we finish discussing the developmental issues. The important thing is to get developmental issues ahead. If you are not able to get the developmental issues ahead, then you will be caught up in 5 days of just geopolitics, which war is not our creation. War is not India's creation. It's not a creation of the global south. The G20 should really think of the global south to make it human-centric and to ensure that no one is left behind, and then finally come to the critical issue of.
Well, once this is done, India's already handed over B20 in a sense to Brazil, and then after the summit is over, there are another couple of months to go, and then India hands over G20 to Brazil as well. How do you think the year has gone? If you were to make a absolutely honest and candid assessment, I know it's difficult to do that, but how do you think the year's gone?
I think it's been tough, it's been challenging, it's been complex, but India's done extremely well. India's held the G20 presidency like nobody has ever done before. Taking G20 from, instead of one city, to 60 cities of India, taking it to all the states of India, taking it to the citizens of India, taking it to every single common man of India, and making sure that yet you remain very inclusive, very, very inclusive, very decisive, very action-oriented, and be the voice of the global south has been a very satisfying experience.
Well, Amitabh Kant, you've got a really, really busy week and a busy 10 days ahead of you. It's been a great job as Sherpa ever since you take over. You've got this final lap to run, so all the best with it.
Thank you.
And our compliments. We'll perhaps talk to you after G20 is over to see, hopefully you'll get the consensus on all the issues that you're hoping for.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
India Sherpa to G20, Amitabh Kant in that exclusive interview to the India story. And let's move now to our regular segment, what the global press has actually been saying about India this week. And of course, a lot of the headlines were dominated by that report in the Financial Times and the Guardian, talking once again about the Adani Group and some of the paper trail that those publications claim that they have found. We reported on that earlier in this program. The Adani Group, of course, coming out and saying these are nothing but old allegations which have been debunked in the past being recirculated. The national news in the UAE, it's a UAE-based publication, talks about the India-UK trade deal, and it says that it has hit a fresh stumbling block due to a disagreement over the production of cheap generic drugs. According to this report, Britain wants curbs on the production of non-branded medications, but negotiators from India have reportedly rejected that demand. Earlier this week, UK officials had said that good progress was being made on a trade deal, but it now appears unlikely that it will be ready to sign when Rishi Sunak visits India for the G20 summit. That's all there in the report. The BBC has an interesting report on erratic climate conditions driving food prices up by over 11% in India. And in a sense, it links that with inflation elsewhere. In somewhat convoluted logic, it says that inflation is leading to the Indian government's ban on exports to stabilize domestic supply. And it says, in a sense, it is therefore exporting inflation to other parts of the world. The BBC says that these actions may raise global food prices in other countries, especially those that are reliant on Indian exports. In Bollywood, women lead on screen, yet behind the scenes remains a male-dominated space. Citing India's Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Al Jazeera reports a 5.5:2 men-to-women crew ratio, but change is underway. As per the report, female staff in Bollywood are now uniting forming their own unions to address issues like insufficient facilities, lower pay, and safety concerns. Well, all of India and most of the world has been celebrating the grand success of Chandrayaan-3 and basking in the glory of the success of its moon mission. ISRO is now ready with its maiden mission to the sun, or to a good position from which to see the sun. Aditya L1 mission is the first space-based Indian observatory to study the sun and is being launched on Saturday from Sriharikota. According to ISRO, the spacecraft will be placed in a halo orbit around the Lagrange point, or L1, of the Sun-Earth system, which is about 1.5 million kilometers from the Earth. The journey to the designated mission site will take about 4 months to cover, placing the Aditya L1 spacecraft in a halo orbit around the L1 point of the Earth-Sun system will mean it is able to continuously view the sun without any disruption at all. Equipped with 7 payloads, Aditya L1 will study the sun's corona, solar emissions, solar winds and flares, and it will carry out around-the-clock imaging of the star. The L1 point is already home to the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Satellite, an international collaboration project of NASA and the European Space Agency. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, the successor to the famous Hubble, is stationed in the L2 position, where it's looking at the broader galaxy and other parts of the universe. So this mission to L1 is really, really significant. And to talk more about it, we're now being joined by space scientist Narendra Bhandari. Narendra ji, thank you so much for joining us. Just wanted to get your details on what is special about the Aditya program. It is going to the Lagrange point. What is so special about that?
There are 2 or 3 things very special, particular about this mission. One is that we are sending instruments in multispectral band. That means ultraviolet, low energy X-rays and high energy X-rays will view the sun. Then I will put it at Lagrange point, which is a stable point very close to Earth, not that far. And we can examine the sun for a very long time. The mystery about the sun is that it has a layered structure. There is a photosphere, then chromosphere, and then corona. And one of the mystery is that the temperature of the corona is very much higher than in the chromosphere. So that is not well understood, although many missions have gone before. This is all play of magnetic field. So there are 2 objectives of this mission. One is to examine the sun, observe it, and try to solve this mystery. How there are sometimes large mass ejections from the sun, as big as the Earth. How they originate, that is not known. How they get initiated. We know the rest of the story, how they come to the interplanetary space, but we don't know what triggers them. And secondly, we want to study the environment, the plasma environment near the Earth. You know, solar wind is coming, solar flares are coming, all plasma, which is charged particles, are coming. So we'll study that atmosphere.
Right, so that's a really clear exposition of all that can be expected from Aditya. But seeing as we have you with us, you've also been seeing the science that's been coming out of the Chandrayaan-3 mission, both from Pragyan and from the Vikram lander. What is your sense of the major findings so far?
I think, in my opinion, the greatest highlight is the greatest discovery is that of sulfur. You know, all other elements, calcium, aluminum, and oxygen are expected. Every rock has that. Sulfur is a biochemically active element. And I was always thinking that if the water on moon has come from comets, then we should look for organic compounds there, because comets have a lot of alcohol, ethane and methane and so on. So this is the first indication that there may be something more than just water. And sulfur is, I think, a hint. And maybe next time, I hope that my proposal will be taken up and they will send some sensors to look for organic compounds there, which may be buried, frozen with ice in the craters. So this, I think, is a one single great thing we have found.
Well, of course, the rover and the Vikram lander continuing to search for water. Other things have happened. They found some interesting temperature differentials between the surface and further down. Those are also significant discoveries, according to you?
Well, you see, water is a very miraculous molecule. You can get hydrogen from it and get power, and you can get oxygen from it and support human habitation. So everybody is looking for that, and now we must understand what is the characteristic of the soil there. Now as we landed there at the sunrise time, so the temperature of the surface goes high, but inside is very cold. So there is a wave type of thing. So we have to understand what is the profile, what is the characteristics, the minerals, chemistry of soil, if we want to build a base there.
All right, Narendraji, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. We're going to keep a very close eye on the Aditya mission as well. Thank you so much for being with us. And now a very special newsmaker right here on the India Story. And he clearly represents the India story in so many ways. He is the nation's pride, a symbol of dedication and triumph. He's not just broken records, he's shattered them, creating a legacy that will forever shine in India's sporting history. With a heart full of passion and a javelin in his hand, Neeraj Chopra has propelled India to new heights on the global stage. His recent gold medal win at the World Athletics Championships stands as a momentous milestone as he became the first Indian to stand atop that coveted podium. Having won the Olympic gold a couple of years back, this World Championship gold has solidified his status as the world's finest in javelin throw and almost certainly the GOAT, the greatest of all time when it comes to Indian athletics. The embodiment of hard work, perseverance and a nation's dreams, he's united India in celebration and inspired generations to come. His influence is such that many are going to be sacrificing their sleep just to witness his feats unfold on the television. Like late on Thursday night at the Diamond League in Zurich, where he stamped his prowess once again, securing a remarkable second place out there. It just shows what the expectations are of Neeraj Chopra. So without further wait and further ado, let me say we are honored to speak to the man himself, Neeraj Chopra, now joining us right here on the India Story. Neeraj, many congratulations. You're the reigning Olympic champion. You won the Commonwealth Games and the Asian Games gold. You won the Diamond League last year. You've now completed the set with the gold at the World Athletics Championships. How does it feel? You have very few further peaks to actually climb.
थैंक यू सो मच सर। नहीं, बिल्कुल एथलीट्स तो बहुत मान रहे हैं अपने देश में और बिल्कुल आगे भी होंगे, पर अच्छा लग रहा है सर। फाइनली हमारे जो गेम में दो सबसे बड़े वर्ल्ड वाइड जो गेम्स और वो चैंपियनशिप थे, वहां पे जीत के बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है।
Neeraj, what do you think is actually still missing from your cabinet? We know breaching the 90-meter mark is something that I'm sure you want to do, perhaps getting a second Olympic gold in a row. Those could be your top targets, but what else?
नहीं, बिल्कुल डिस्टेंस का तो हमेशा रहेगा सर कि 90 मीटर भी लगेगा, उसके बाद और ज़्यादा हमेशा थ्रो बढ़ाने का वो तो टारगेट रहेगा। और हाँ जी, बिल्कुल मेडल्स दोबारा जीतने हैं, वो भी हमेशा एक मोटिवेशन बना के रखना है और मेहनत करनी है कि दोबारा से फिर से मेडल जीतते हैं हम।
Now coming back to that World Championship, last year you finished second. This year you managed to do what no Indian had done before. You got India's first gold at the World Athletics Championships. Now that apart, something that must be making you very happy and very proud, there were two other Indians in the top 6, Kishore Jaina and DP Manu. So you, Neeraj Chopra, seem to have started a revolution there in javelin in India.
नहीं, बिल्कुल अगर मेरी उसकी बात करें तो गोल्ड की तो खुशी थी, लेकिन मुझे उतनी ही ज्यादा खुशी ये हो रही थी कि कैसे हम इंडिया वाले कैसे वहां पे एक दूसरे को पुश कर रहे थे और कैसे हम इस लेवल पे परफॉर्म कर रहे थे। तो वो देख के बहुत मजा आ रहा था कि ना केवल मेरे मेडल की बात करेंगे, लेकिन बाकी जो दोनों की उनकी परफॉर्मेंस रही, जेना की और डीपी मनु की, वो देख के मुझे बहुत मजा आ रहा था अंदर वहां पे।
You know, one of the moments that always strikes me whenever I'm looking at you giving those winning throws your celebration, we've got so fond of it, we've got so used to it. You seem to turn around and raise your arms without even looking to see where the javelin has actually gone, where it's hit the ground. You seem to be sure of where the javelin is going once you've thrown it correctly.
नहीं बिल्कुल सर, पता लग जाता है क्योंकि इतनी मेहनत की है इस उसके लिए, थ्रो के लिए, और पता लग जाता है जब अच्छा थ्रो निकलता है तो काफी अच्छा फील होता है खुद को।
नीरज जी, आपके और पाकिस्तान के अरशद नदीम के बारे में बहुत कुछ लिखा गया है, बहुत कुछ कहा गया है. It's been said that you have, of course, a rivalry with Arshad Nadeem, but also some sort of a bond with him. Seems to be some sort of a camaraderie. You were posing together, in a sense, under the Indian flag just after you got the gold and he got the silver at the World Athletics Championship. तो अरशद नदीम के बारे में आप क्या कहेंगे?
नहीं बिल्कुल जी, राइवल्स तो हैं ही, पर हमेशा जो भी मेरे कॉम्पिटिटर्स हैं उनके साथ हमारा सभी का आपस में एक अच्छा रिलेशन भी है. हम एक दूसरे को हमेशा पुश करते हैं अंदर खेलते टाइम भी, और हमेशा ही अच्छा लगता है एक दूसरे को पुश करना, और फिर एक फ्रेंडली एनवायरनमेंट है सभी का, तो वो चीज़ बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है.
नीरज जी, कई इंजरीज का आपने सामना किया है इस साल भी, और फिर भी आप वापस इतने स्ट्रांगली आए हैं. सो यू कम बैक वेरी स्ट्रांगली फ्रॉम दैट ग्रोइन इशू दैट यू हैड. व्हाट गोज ऑन बिहाइंड द सीन व्हेन यू आर आउट ऑफ एक्शन, बट यू स्टिल नो यू नीड टू बी इन द बेस्ट शेप व्हेन देयर आर सो मेनी टॉप इवेंट्स कमिंग अप? इतने सारे इवेंट्स आ रहे हैं, आपको टॉप शेप में होना है, आप क्या करते हैं?
बस सर, सबसे मेन बात तो वही होती है कि ऐसे टाइम पे मेंटली खुद को प्रिपेयर रखना होता है कि कोई नहीं, ट्रेनिंग इतनी अच्छी नहीं हो रही, लेकिन आपको पता होता है कि हाँ, ये मेरे लिए कितना बड़ा मौका है, और ये मौका 2 साल बाद आना था सर. 2 साल बाद वर्ल्ड चैंपियनशिप होनी है इसके बाद. तो वही है कि मेंटली मैं खुद को प्रिपेयर रख रहा था कि कोई नहीं, ठीक है, अभी ठीक बेटर लग रहा है, और मुझे अपना बिल्कुल 100% देना है. और खुद पे वही है कि ऐसे टाइम पे खुद पे बिलीव रखना होता है कि मैं वर्ल्ड चैंपियनशिप में या उस कंपटीशन में अच्छा कर दूंगा.
आपका अगला लक्ष्य शायद एशियन गेम्स होगा. यू मस्ट बी एक्साइटेड, यू आर द रीनिंग चैंपियन in the Asian Games. आप पर कितना प्रेशर है when you are defending a title like that, the Asian Games?
सर, एशियन गेम्स से पहले हमारे पास यूजीन डायमंड लीग है, जो फाइनल डायमंड लीग होगी यूएसए में, और उसके बाद फिर एशियन गेम्स में जाऊंगा मैं. तो नहीं बिल्कुल जी, वो तो रहता ही है कि हाँ, पिछली बार जीता था, इस बार फिर अपना 100% देना है. पर वही है कि सर, अपना बस मेन फोकस वहाँ पे उस टाइम जब खेल रहे होते हैं तो वहाँ पे ये होता है कि कैसे अपना बेस्ट परफॉर्मेंस निकालें और अपना बेस्ट परफॉर्मेंस दे. मेन चीज़ तो वही रहती है, और बाकी सर जो उसके बाद वही डिसाइड करता है क्या रिजल्ट रहता है, लेकिन उस टाइम पे मेन माइंड में ही रहता है कि कैसे अपना बेस्ट परफॉर्मेंस दें.
Neeraj, it was revealed only a couple of days back that India is going to be bidding perhaps for the 2027 World Athletics Championship. Javelin throw is so popular, all thanks to you. So, do you think this is something that will help India's sporting landscape altogether? अगर मान लीजिए भारत 2027 World Athletics Championships को होस्ट करती है, उससे क्या असर पड़ सकता है?
मुझे भी सर यहाँ डायमंड लीग की प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में पता लगा कि इससे इंडिया बिड कर रहा है वर्ल्ड चैंपियनशिप, और बिल्कुल वो भी यही पूछ रहे थे कि जेवलिन में तो आएंगे, लेकिन बाकी इवेंट्स भी आपको लगता है देखने आएंगे. तो मैं बस वही है, अपने लोगों को यही रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि आप एथलेटिक्स को फॉलो करें और ज़्यादा इवेंट्स देखें. हमारे काफ़ी कॉम्पिटिशन्स होते रहते हैं, डायमंड लीग होती है या वर्ल्ड चैंपियनशिप या कुछ भी होता है, तो आप फॉलो करें एथलेटिक्स को, ताकि आपको और पता लगे एथलेटिक्स के इवेंट्स के बारे में. इतना मुश्किल नहीं है, क्योंकि बहुत ही आसान है कि जो सबसे तेज दौड़ेगा वो फर्स्ट आएगा, और सबसे ऊंची या सबसे लंबी कूद लगा गया, थ्रो में जितनी दूर फेंकेंगे, जो सबसे ज्यादा दूर फेंकेगा वो फर्स्ट सेकंड थर्ड ऐसे आते हैं. तो इतना मुश्किल नहीं है, बट वही है कि थोड़े बहुत जो रूल्स हैं, कैसे फाउल होता है और कैसे क्या क्या रूल्स होते हैं एथलेटिक्स के, बस वो थोड़ा सा जानने की जरूरत है. तो बहुत ही आसान स्पोर्ट है एथलेटिक्स, और बहुत ही नेचुरल स्पोर्ट है. तो लोगों को इंटरेस्ट बनेगा तो बिल्कुल समझ में आ जाएगा, और वो बाकी अपने अदर इवेंट्स को भी बिल्कुल फॉलो करेंगे और सपोर्ट करेंगे.
Neeraj, do you feel that there is a difference now with how India is perceived globally in terms of athletics? You are the world champion, you won the Olympic gold medal, and there are a few green sprouts out there like the 4x400 meters relay team. जो एक बार इंडिया की इमेज होती थी एथलेटिक्स में, क्या वो बदल रही है और आपकी वजह से बदल रही है?
बिल्कुल सर, अगर आप ऑल ओवर परफॉर्मेंस देखेंगे तो किसको पता था कि हम ऐसे भले ही वो हीट्स थी लेकिन एशिया रिकॉर्ड किया अपनी टीम ने। और यूएस के एथलीट्स के साथ वो दौड़ रहे थे उनके साथ में मिलके, तो वो भी बहुत अपने आप में एक बहुत बड़ी बात थी कि उनके साथ दौड़ना और उनके बराबर में फिनिश करना। और बाकी दूसरे इवेंट्स में भी बहुत अच्छा, लॉन्ग जंप में बहुत अच्छा हो रहा है, स्टीपल चेज में बहुत बढ़िया हो रहा है। तो काफी ऐसे इवेंट्स है जो कि अपना ट्रिपल जंप है उसमें भी बहुत अच्छा करेंगे आगे। तो एथलेटिक्स के काफी इवेंट्स ऐसे हैं कि अभी बहुत ज्यादा अच्छी इंप्रूवमेंट है और होपफुली फ्यूचर में हम अच्छा ही होगा और भी।
Neeraj, one last thing I had to ask you. You get a lot of credit because you quite often speak up for matters that matter to you, such as women wrestlers. Sometimes those could be, things that people want to shy away from because they think it is controversial. You're always willing to speak up for things that you believe are correct. Where do you get the confidence and the courage to do that? Because it gets you a lot of plaudits.
नहीं सर, मुझे लगता है कि देखो स्पोर्ट्स का मैटर है तो वहां पे कोशिश यही करता हूँ कि जितना जितना मुझे पता है चीज का, और जो भी मुझे लगता है कि हाँ कई बार हमको आपस में एथलीट्स का साथ देना चाहिए, और जो मैटर मुझे लगता है कि स्पोर्ट्स का कुछ चल रहा है तो उसका पता होते हुए फिर कई बार मन करता है सर कि कुछ अपना 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 जो व्यू है, अपनी जो अंदर बात है वो तो रखें कम से कम बीच में। बस मेन तो वही रहता है कि सर जो ठीक लगता है, कई बार ऐसी चीजें होती है जो हमको पता नहीं होता है बातों का, तो वहां पे मैं कोशिश करता हूँ कि उस टॉपिक पे बोल लेना, क्योंकि हमको क्लियर पता नहीं होता। लेकिन कुछ भी थोड़ा बहुत अगर हमको पता है और स्पोर्ट्स का मैटर है तो उसमें मैं कोशिश करता हूँ कि अपना अपना व्यू तो रख सकते हैं हम कि हमको क्या लग रहा है।
Neeraj Chopra, a true icon. I'm going to call him the GOAT, the greatest of all time when it comes to Indian athletics. It's such a pleasure and such